Welcome to Sound Bites, hosted by registered dietitian nutritionist Melissa Joy Dobbins. Let's delve into the science, the psychology, and the strategies behind good food and nutrition.
Hello and welcome back to the Sound Bites podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Joy Dobbins. Today's episode is about the potential role of fresh avocados as part of a heart-healthy diet in overweight or obese adults, specifically a 6-hour postprandial crossover study published in the journal Nutrientdense in September of 2018. We will also discuss the importance of nutrient-dense foods and the potential role of mindful eating in practice for diabetes management. My guest today is Erin Palinski-Wade. She's a nationally recognized dietitian, certified diabetes educator, fitness expert, busy mom, and a spokesperson for Fresh Avocados Love One Today. This episode is sponsored by Fresh Avocados Love One Today, and we thank them for their sponsorship and support of the podcast. Love One Today is a science-based food and wellness education program that encourages Americans to include fresh Hass avocados in everyday healthy eating plans to help increase fruit and vegetable intake, and as a delicious, heart-healthy, whole food source of fiber and naturally good fats. This podcast is also eligible for one free continuing education unit for dietitians, diet technicians, and certified diabetes educators through the Commission on Dietetic Registration. You can visit the show notes at soundbitesrd.com/podcast for more information. So welcome to the show, Erin.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here. And as a registered dietitian, and as you mentioned, I'm a certified diabetes care and education specialist and a Love One Today avocado goodness expert. I'm always so excited to talk about fresh avocado and share the research contributing to the growing body of evidence supporting the consumption of fresh avocados as a nutritious and satisfying food choice that also may help to reduce type 2 diabetes risk factors.
Excellent. Yes, it's really nice to have you on the podcast. I always look forward to talking about diabetes management and prevention strategies, especially with another certified diabetes educator. And as you indicated, the new term for certified diabetes educator is certified diabetes care and education specialist. So I would love for you to share a little bit more about your background and the work that you do.
Thank you. I have been a dietitian for a decade and a half, and I am always so passionate about looking for new research when it comes to ways we can be healthier with our busy lives, especially when it comes to diabetes management. I work in private practice with a large number of people with diabetes. I'm a busy mom myself of 3 children, so I'm always looking for ways to incorporate new research, and that's where I'm so excited to be here today with you to talk about this research and how it applies to really all of our lives.
Okay, well, let's jump into the research study and also want to discuss and share out some practical tips, of course, for everybody listening. So the title of the study is Avocado Fruit on Postprandial Markers of Cardio-Metabolic Risk, a randomized controlled dose response trial in overweight and obese men and women. And it was published in Nutrientdense in September 2018, like I mentioned, and it was supported by the Avocado Nutrition Center. So we have a few interesting points to cover today. So in starting with the research, then moving on to the importance of the nutrient-dense foods that I mentioned and the role of mindful eating in practice for diabetes management, how does that sound?
Wow, it sounds great. I'm excited.
Okay. So starting with the featured study, can you share some background information on why it was conducted in the first place and what the researchers were looking for?
Absolutely. As we know, diet has a significant role when it comes to disease development and protection, specifically when it comes to certain diseases like diabetes. So more recently, the quality of carbohydrates and fats has been examined more closely for their impact on health. There was epidemiological studies that have revealed that consumption of refined carbohydrate-containing diets and or diets that are high in saturated fat may be associated with an increased prevalence of type 2 diabetes and the risk for coronary heart disease. So more specifically, diets containing excessive amounts of refined carbohydrates and saturated fats are what are considered risk factors in developing metabolic and glycemic disturbances. So that's what makes these nutrients targets for control. And saturated fat, as I'm sure many of your listeners are probably aware, has been associated with cardio-metabolic risks for years, while diets containing higher amounts of monounsaturated fatty acids are suggested to be protective and have potential beneficial effects, like enhancing insulin sensitivity and improving plasma total and LDL cholesterol levels.
So I suppose this is why avocados were of interest for this particular research.
Absolutely, you got it. So avocados are essentially the only healthy fruit with good fats. And eating avocados is a convenient and it's really a delicious way to help people meet the dietary guidelines for Americans and those recommendations to shift from eating saturated fat and to start enjoying more unsaturated fats to help reduce LDL cholesterol levels, that bad cholesterol in the blood. Mm-hmm. So just to elaborate on that, if we think about the last update of the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, which is the 2015 to 2020 recommendations, these highlighted eating nutrient-dense foods, and they suggested that replacing saturated fats with complex carbohydrates, polyunsaturated and or monounsaturated fats could benefit both total cholesterol levels and LDL cholesterol concentrations. So when we look at dietary patterns emphasizing certain nutrients, like monounsaturated fats, while decreasing others, such as saturated fats or refined carbohydrates, this may have favorable effects on cardio-metabolic health. So from a counseling perspective, if we're thinking about it that way, having easy substitutions is key in really making these dietary modifications. And single foods like fresh avocados that inherently contain these dietary components are really ideal for helping people to meet the heart and metabolic health goals.
Well, that makes sense. And so it's likely that most of our listeners are familiar with the fact that replacing saturated fat with unsaturated fats is a heart-healthy choice. And also that diabetes is a major risk factor for cardiovascular disease. But I feel like the impacts of foods like fresh avocados on specific biomarkers of type 2 diabetes might not be as well known. So I'm really looking forward to exploring this part of the research with you.
Yes, I totally agree. And these impacts and implications are really important to explore. The aim of this study was to investigate the strategy of incorporating avocados into a breakfast meal, replacing mainly carbohydrates with fat by adding monounsaturated fats and polyunsaturated fats from avocado on postprandial markers of metabolic and vascular health. So researchers are looking at changes in glycemic indexes along with changes in markers of endothelial function, inflammation, and oxidative stress and damage, each having a role in cardiometabolic health.
Great. So now that we have some background information here, let's dive into the study methodology. Who were the participants and how was it set up and conducted?
So the participants included 31 overweight or obese adults between the ages of 25 to 60 years old. And they all had a BMI between 25 and 35. They also had elevated fasting glucose levels and insulin concentrations. The study is a single-center, randomized, controlled, 3-arm, 6-hour postprandial crossover study. So to explain that, there were 3 different energy-matched breakfast meals. One contained no avocado, which was the control. One was containing a half, and one was containing a whole, fresh Hass avocado. So participants came to the laboratory on 3 separate occasions and consumed each meal once based on randomly assigned sequences. The postprandial part refers to the measurements taken after the meal was consumed to examine the effects.
Okay, great. And so what did the researchers find?
So when compared to the control meal with no avocado, participants who ate either half or a whole avocado showed reduced postprandial glycemia, including reduced peak glucose and insulin concentrations, along with increased vasorelaxation. Now, the researchers also saw that replacing carbohydrates in the meal with half or a whole avocado dropped peak glucose to levels within a normal range. And peak insulin concentrations were also lower after consuming meals with avocado, which suggests that reducing burden on the pancreas while managing glucose concentrations. And moreover, replacing carbohydrates with avocado guarded against exaggerated drops in glucose concentrations below baseline, drops that were observed after eating the control meal.
Very interesting. Okay, so this really speaks to the power of these simple substitutions, as you alluded to earlier. So I'm wondering, what are some of the study's strengths and limitations that we should consider?
Let me start with a few unique and interesting strengths. First, the study was performed in at-risk population, providing insight on the cardio-metabolic effects of dietary changes, such as incorporating avocados as a source of health-promoting nutrients. It's also relatively unique in that the dietary substitutions with fat-rich foods typically focus on replacing saturated fat with monounsaturated fat, whereas in this study, they looked at replacing carbohydrate with mostly monounsaturated fat. In addition, the study replaced carbohydrates in a standard breakfast meal with 2 intake levels of avocado, while maintaining the energy content of the meals to minimize variability. Now, as with any research, there's also limitations to consider.
Mm-hmm.
And this was an acute postprandial study to allow for the understanding of the effects of nutritional factors during metabolism. This provides a valuable insight, but it's important to note that the study design does not allow for drawing conclusions on long-term effects or generalizations to all populations. So that would require follow-up studies.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a need to further understand the race and ethnic disparities in diet therapy and how results might vary there as well.
Great point. Okay. Well, thank you for all of that information. Would you be able to kind of summarize the key takeaways for us?
Of course. So essentially, when we look at the study, what it's suggesting is that incorporating fresh avocados may add to the nutrient diversity of the diet, while also potentially offering important cardio-metabolic benefits relevant to diabetes and weight management. So as we know, managing glycemic response to meals in a favorable range has important health implications for lowering diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And from a practical standpoint, avocados are a nutrient-rich dietary option to help us with this.
Well, that sounds like great news. While I think many of our listeners have probably heard the term nutrient-dense, you just used the term nutrient-rich, which I love to use myself. Could you define nutrient-dense in case anyone listening is not familiar with it, and also explain why nutrient-dense foods like avocados are good choices for people with diabetes?
Yes, and that's such a great question. I'm glad you brought that up because I'm always talking about that with my clients in my practice as well.
Mm-hmm.
The actual definition of nutrient-dense foods are those that provide substantial amounts of vitamins, minerals, and other nutrients with relatively few calories. So that includes foods like vegetables, fruits, whole grains, eggs, and other foods too. Foods with little or no saturated fat, sodium, and added sugars. And that's how you can see how fresh avocados fall into this category.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as we're on that topic of nutrient density, I wanted to address potential concerns around cost and how to incorporate fresh avocados on a tighter budget, because I've had clients ask me about this before. They want to eat more avocados, but sometimes they worry about the cost. So what I like to do is encourage them to consider the nutritional value per volume versus the cost per volume. As a nutrient-dense fruit, just 1/3 of a medium avocado, which is 50 grams, it contributes nearly 20 vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients. And it's also a good source of 5 essential nutrients: fiber, folate, vitamin K, pantothenic acid, and copper. So in other words, it may be strategic for consumers to shop the produce aisle thinking more in terms of nutritional bang for their buck versus just worrying about costs as a whole.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Healthy eating on a budget is one of my favorite topics, and I couldn't agree more. You got to look at what nutrition is that food providing you for the calorie cost, but also the money cost, right?
Absolutely.
That's a great perspective. Thank you for sharing that. But yeah, for people on a tighter budget, and really anybody who's, shopping for produce, we always want to get more bang for our buck, right? And, there's a lot of nutrient-dense options in the produce aisle, and we already touched on the good fats in avocados, but are there any other particular nutrients that make avocados a great choice for people with diabetes?
Yes, definitely. And I'm glad you asked. So, when it comes to diabetes management, what's really great about avocados is they're naturally sugar-free, and they only have 4 grams of carbohydrate, 3 of which are dietary fiber. So when they're eaten alone, they don't have an effect on glycemic response. And they also have this unique combination of nutrients that includes 5 grams of that good monounsaturated fat, as I mentioned earlier, along with those 3 grams of fiber. So that's particularly interesting when you take a closer look at fat and fiber specifically, because with that, they may help to slow gastric emptying, delay nutrient absorption, and regulate both glucose and insulin responses, as well as alter gut hormones involved in satiety. Because fats are this potent stimulator of certain hormones that promote satiety, those hormones that are not stimulated by carbohydrates. And so why that's important is that this impact of dietary fat may be enhanced when we eat more fiber with it as well.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I love that combination of the fiber and the healthy fat, dynamic duo, if you will. And, it makes perfect sense as you're saying this, but has there been specific research supporting this as well?
Yes, absolutely. There has been, which is really, really exciting. The findings on fat and fiber I just mentioned were based on another study by the same researchers. And what they did is they explored the potential role of nutrient combinations, particularly fat and fiber, and they looked at how it may enhance satiety. Now, this research was conducted in 31 men and women, and they were between the ages of 20 to 65 years of age. Their BMI was between 25 and 35, and the participants did have elevated fasting glucose and insulin levels. So what they found was that replacing carbohydrates in a high carbohydrate meal with avocado-derived fat-fiber combination, it increased feelings of satiety. And they saw that the higher levels of fat in the meal were associated with subjects feeling more satisfied, whereas increasing both the avocado-derived fat and fiber combinations offers additional satiety-inducing benefits, influencing several subjective variables. So what we look at with this research is, whether it was the fat component or the fiber component driving the effect, that's still subject for subsequent research. But when we looked at the test meal to measure the subsequent intake 6 hours after the meal, the gut hormone measurements may provide additional insights with regards to fullness ratings as well. Because the findings from this research suggest that replacing carbohydrate energy with fat energy in combination with a source of inherent rather than added fiber, as demonstrated by adding the avocados to the meal, may actually increase the satiety value of the meal when we compare it to a low-fat, high-carbohydrate meal.
That makes sense. Satiety is such an interesting subject, and it's really an important factor when it comes to managing our hunger and what we eat and how much we eat. So I love hearing about emerging research like what you just shared. I do worry sometimes as a dietitian and a diabetes educator that people with diabetes, they either might receive strict recommendations or they might interpret the recommendations as strict, and that focusing more on good foods and what to include versus things to limit in their diet is so much more approachable. So I like this discussion of satiety, and it also leads us nicely into the topic of mindful eating. So can you start with a little background on what mindful eating is for those who are listening who may not be familiar with it? And I think most people are, but again, I think it's a good place for us to start. And then we can launch into how nutrient-dense foods might be a great complement to the practice of mindful eating.
Definitely, definitely. So it's one of my favorite topics because mindful eating, really, if we think of it in the simplest terms, it's just bringing attention not just to what you're eating, but to how you're eating. So it's making eating an intentional act versus an automatic act. And when we're bringing awareness to how we're eating, and we're really being aware of cravings and the experiences and the physical senses that are involved, like what does the food taste like? What does it smell like? The sight, even the sound. We may be able to better get in tune with our body's hunger and satiety cues. And when we use these cues, they can help us to recognize when we eat for true hunger versus when we're eating for other reasons, like eating for emotional reasons. And so what's great about this is if we're fostering an awareness of an individual's triggers that can drive that desire to eat, even when true hunger isn't present, it's really going to help open the opportunity to address them in other helpful ways. If we think about it, it may help us to make better choices that are satisfying and nourishing to the body and the mind. And it also helps to take away that idea of judgment. You can eat more aware, or you're aware of what your body's needing. It gets rid of that judgment. And ultimately, that brings about that goal of improving the overall relationship with food. And I'm sure you experience this as well. That whole relationship with food is something that can be quite challenging for clients with diabetes.
Absolutely. That's one of the reasons I call myself the guilt-free RD, because food shouldn't make you feel bad. That relationship with food is very important. And sometimes, like you said, a little challenging, a little dicey. So I really love that approach. I think it's important for everybody to be able to enjoy their food, as I like to say, with health in mind. So does this awareness that we're talking about here with the mindful eating and not being on autopilot, but just, paying attention and maybe self-care focus there as well, does this translate to any specific dietary habits that can improve or might improve with mindful eating?
Yeah, I definitely believe it is. We look at the research, which is emerging, but the research that's been explored does share that there might be a potential impact of mindful eating in a few positive ways. So one of which is just slowing down when we're eating and being more intentional. And that may actually positively influence both the quality and the quantity of food choices. Mindful eating has been examined when we look at changes in weight and body composition and even eating patterns, particularly when we look at patterns of fruit and vegetable consumption and lowering the intake of those energy-dense foods, as well as looking at the impact it can have on things like reducing the frequency or severity of binge eating and emotional eating or stress-driven eating. So there definitely needs to be more research. We have to look at mindfulness interventions, but they do look like they may offer promise for helping with dysregulated eating and helping to reduce stress and enhance that whole state of overall well-being.
Wonderful. Well, this makes me want to circle back to satiety, which, feels like a sensation that would be quite relevant. So let's discuss the potential influence of mindful eating on satiety.
Definitely. And I think you mentioned it too, is that it's pretty much when we think about that whole idea of being mindful, it's not surprising that eating mindfully may improve satiety and satisfaction. And that in turn can help to reduce portion sizes at future snacks and meals. When we focus on the act of eating and we involve all of our senses, it just simply allows us to recognize and experience satisfaction in a way that we wouldn't if we're eating when we're distracted. We're just grabbing something and eating on the run. Mm-hmm. And so when we do this, it's really opening that opportunity to recognize more subtle cues, like when you just become hungry versus ignoring it and getting ravenous and eating too fast or too much. So we still need more research. More research is needed to understand those underlying mechanisms linking the whole practice of mindful eating to improve satisfaction. But some of the benefits may also just lie in the act of slowing down when we're eating, because it's giving time for those satiety hormones in the gut to send the messages to the brain. And that's something that just isn't possible when we're rushed in eating.
Right. Absolutely. Makes perfect sense. We need to give our bodies time to feel that sense of fullness and get an idea of what that feels like for us, because it varies from person to person, those hunger and satiety feelings and cues. How does this all tie back to diabetes management? Considering dietary implications associated with diabetes, how is mindful eating, or the practice of mindful eating, really feasible and relevant for this diabetes population?
I'm really, really glad you asked that question, because this is one of my favorite topics and questions. Now, as we dive into that, what I want to do is start with a few caveats regarding mindfulness. First, as a rule, it's not enough to just remind oneself to just let go and be mindful. Because in the early stages of becoming more mindful, most of us are unaware of our habitual eating patterns. One can't just immediately decide to live in the present moment and then instantly realize a state of being. Rather, mindful state develops over time with regular practice, both formally and informally, on a daily basis. Now, the second thing to note is that more diabetes self-management education practitioners need to receive training in mindfulness and meditation to be able to offer this approach to a broader array of people with diabetes. Currently, there's no formal academic credentialing process. However, there is training available through reputable institutions. Now, the third thing to note is the long-term impact of mindful eating on diabetes outcomes is unknown. Longer follow-up is needed to determine whether study participants continue to engage in mindful eating as a way of life. And the fourth, which is I find a little surprising too, is most mindful eating research completed has been conducted in primarily female samples. So more research is needed to identify better ways to attract men to these interventions and the acceptability and the outcomes of mindfulness approaches among men. And finally, the field of mindful eating is still in the early stages of empirical research. More work is needed to determine whether mindfulness mediates the relationship between mindfulness training and the outcomes of interest like weight regulation. Whether mindfulness is the mechanism by which mindfulness interventions works remains to be determined. Now, with all that being said, based on the impact mindful eating can have on dietary habits, I do think it's worthwhile to explore the role of mindful eating and how it may play a role in diabetes management. Because when it comes to managing diabetes, we know that dietary habits and lifestyle both play a key role. Blood glucose management depends on our food choices, our timing, and our portion sizes. And dietary choices also impact things like body weight, which in turn can impact insulin sensitivity and blood glucose levels. And lifestyle choices like physical activity and stress, they also impact blood glucose levels. So the concept of mindfulness, it's attracted a considerable amount of attention, which I'm sure you're aware. When we look at behavioral medicine, weight regulation, diabetes management, there's been a lot of attention to mindfulness. In just 2012 alone, 34% of U.S. adults reported using a complementary health approach, and meditation was among the top 5 most commonly used approaches.
Interesting. Well, it's great to hear how you're describing that people with diabetes can apply this mindful approach, and it really makes sense. I mean, I think it's something that can help everybody make healthier choices and, positive lifestyle changes. Just being on autopilot is not usually the healthy way to go. You're going to come up with some problems with that. And I'm speaking from personal experience. But yes, so it's great to hear this as a reminder for people with diabetes that this can really be a powerful tool. Are there any key areas known to impact diabetes that might be improved through mindful eating?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important that we look at the link between mindful eating and diabetes. And there's 3 main areas that I think are quite important. The first is, of course, stress reduction. And we know now more than ever, stress is high among everyone. And research among people with diabetes, it suggests that a mindfulness approach may help to improve things like depressive symptoms, anxiety, even well-being, and diabetes-related distress while improving health-related quality of life. You and I both know stress is just a part of everyday life. We can't get away from it. And when you're also trying to juggle diabetes care, that just adds another level of stress. And it's so important that we address stress because blood sugar levels can be affected too. The stress hormones make blood sugars rise and fall unpredictably. If you're stressed from being sick or injured, that can elevate your levels of blood sugar as well. And so people with diabetes, when we look at the research, people with diabetes are 20% more likely than those without diabetes to have anxiety at some point in their life. And, I'm sure, as you can imagine, working with the diabetes population as well as myself, when you're managing a long-term condition, that can be a major source of anxiety for so many people. So mindful eating may help to ease some of this. Now, the second area that I think is important to look at is the area of weight management. Because as we know, being overweight raises the risk of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and stroke. And it can also increase the risk of other related issues like high blood pressure or unhealthy cholesterol levels or even high blood glucose. So weight management may help to prevent and manage these conditions. And the research shows us that in individuals with excessive body fat, weight loss has been associated with preventing the progression of insulin resistance to type 2 diabetes, and it improves glycemic management in those who already have been diagnosed with diabetes. So the purpose of mindful eating, it's not to lose weight, but it is highly likely that those who adopt this style of eating will lose weight. The intention, though, really of mindful eating is to help people savor the moment and pay attention to the food and encourage their full presence so they have that full eating experience that can offer that level of satiety rather than just being overly concerned with things like restrictive intake and, those food rules. So that's where I think it's not coincidental that when you have this mindfulness approach, people may choose to eat less because they're savoring the food more, and they might be selecting foods more consistent with those desirable health benefits. And the third area I think to note is meal timing, food choices, portion control. Because as diabetes educators, we're guiding clients in eating to get the nutrition they need while keeping their blood sugar levels in check. And that's a key component of diabetes management. So we're looking at, helping them plan for those regular balanced meals with that appropriate distribution of carbohydrates so we can avoid those highs and low blood sugars. And we know carbs, proteins, and fats and fiber in food all affect blood sugar in different ways. For example, fiber, like fiber found in avocados, that helps to slow down food digestion. So it prevents those rapid rises in blood glucose following a meal. Now, I mentioned before, mindful eating may actually improve eating patterns by increasing fruit and vegetable consumption and other positive choices. So that's where I think it can be really beneficial in this area as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, all great points. Thank you. So, it sounds like there's quite a few ways that the practice of mindful eating can help fellow dietitians who counsel clients with diabetes, or really any healthcare practitioner or listener who's looking to help people improve both the quality of the diet and the relationship with food. So putting all of this information into action, and as I like to say, enjoying your food with health in mind, I was hoping we could transition and discuss some favorite tips to prepare and enjoy fresh avocados. which is one of our favorite nutrient-dense fruits. So what are some of the favorite ways that you like to use avocados?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked, because that's one of my favorite topics, is to talk about how to actually eat the food, right?
Yeah.
So there's so many ways, but one of my favorite ways that a lot of people don't expect is you can bake with avocado to make really healthy desserts. When you look at individuals with diabetes, many of them, and I'm sure you get this all the time too, people with diabetes just think they can't have desserts. They're off limits.
Right.
But it really doesn't have to be the case. And so generally, we want to minimize added sugars in the diet and refined grains. But there's still so many ways that you can incorporate dessert as part of a balanced diet and avoid that whole feeling of deprivation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I love those strategic swaps that really could be key when we're looking at meal plan balance. So one of my favorite ways to do this is to use mashed avocado as a fat swap when you're baking. The predominant fat in avocado is unsaturated, so it makes a great substitute for foods high in saturated fat like butter and other full fat spreads. So, for instance, what you can do is use mashed avocado in replacement of butter to make something like chocolate chip cookies. Like, those are a huge hit in my house, and they're also a big hit with my clients. I also love to toss avocado into smoothies. I don't know if you've ever tried this, but when you put avocado in a smoothie, it's such a great way to enhance the texture and it ups the fiber content as well. And what's really great is if you want to try it, if you have never put an avocado in a smoothie or you've never made chocolate chip cookies with avocado, I definitely recommend it. And two of my favorite recipes, there's the chocolate chip peanut butter avocado cookies and the avocado mango Kickstarter smoothie. Both of them are on loveonetoday.com. And I can tell you that my 3 children love them as well. So I fully trust their opinion. I think they're very good recipes.
Kid tested, mom, and dietitian approved, right?
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, I have not tried using avocado in baking, so I will definitely give that a try. Those cookies sound really good. I've shared many of my favorite ways to enjoy avocados in the first 3 episodes in this series, which if you're listening and you haven't checked those out, you should definitely do that. I'll just add a new thing that I've discovered. I finally jumped on the air fryer bandwagon. I'm still trying out different recipes and trying to figure out, kind of what my go-to recipes are going to be and things that I really enjoy. But one of the first recipes I tried that was a hit was air fryer avocados, and they were delicious, of course. So I'm looking to try new things. I've seen a few more avocado recipes for the air fryer, one that like you cut the avocado in half and you take out the pit and then you scoop a little bit of the fruit out and you put an egg in there. So I'm going to try that one next, but I will have to try baking and see how that goes with swapping out the avocado for the butter.
Yeah, I have to try the air fryer one too. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it is really good. It's really good. So I know that I will have links to all of these resources and recipes and information in my show notes at soundbitesrd.com. But I would love for you to tell our listeners where they can find more information about the studies that we talked about and, more information and recipes on Love One Today.
Absolutely, yes. So I would love for you all to go to loveonetoday.com and check out the Health Professional tab. That's where you're going to find more about all the research we talked about today, as well as summaries of other trials. There's also a really large variety of free educational materials. There's a new downloadable Health Professional handout specific to avocados and type 2 diabetes, which I love. There's such a large collection of really great, satisfying, easy to make recipes. You can search based on whether you want breakfast, lunch, dinner, dessert. You can also at loveonetoday.com subscribe to the quarterly newsletter. It's exclusive for health professionals. And what I love about this is you're always getting the latest research, nutrition information, tips and tricks with fresh avocado, all delivered to your inbox, as well as exciting continuing education opportunities like today's podcast.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Erin. It's been great having you on the show and sharing all of this research and tips on everything avocado. And for everybody listening, if you loved this avocado-centric episode, be sure to go back and listen to episode 150 and 158 to hear my interviews with Marissa Moore. The first one is on weight management and the gut microbiome. And the second one is cognitive health in the overweight and obese adult population. And I also have a recent avocado episode with Patricia Bannon on the topic of antioxidants and heart health. Each of those episodes includes a wealth of additional tasty avocado tips and tricks, such as how to freeze avocado. And remember that this episode is eligible for one free continuing education unit for dietitians, diet technicians, and certified diabetes educators through the Commission on Dietetic Registration. So Erin, thanks again for being on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure. And for everybody listening, as always, enjoy your food with health in mind and mindful eating. Till next time.
For more information, visit soundbitesrd.com. Music by Dave Burke, produced by Jag in Detroit Podcasts.